it crisp in the sleeve. Every Tuesday night feels like Christmas Eve. Living between Wednesdays.
What's up, folks? I'm your host, Conrad, on Wednesday Night Reviews. And today, as you can see, I am joined by the amazing Allison O'Toole, editor extraordinaire. Allison, thanks for taking the time to come on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Conrad. I'm excited to chat.
Absolutely glad to hear it. So my first easy question that I always start with is for the folks out there who maybe never heard your name, never seen your face, who is Allison O'Toole?
I am a freelance comics editor, so that means that I do some self-publishing and editorial. I published an anthology called Shades of Fear last year, and I also work on some more mainstream comics projects. Most folks will probably know me from my work with Chip Zdarsky. I was in his Chip Class videos last year, and I'm also the project manager for his creator-owned books. So we work on Newburn, Public Domain, Afterlift, and the All-Nighter Comicsology, and all of his books that he owns the properties to. I don't touch Batman or Daredevil, so I don't have answers or to those questions.
You know what? I'll ask this a little later, but I'm curious about whether you'd want to or not. But yeah, so beautiful little introduction to yourself to let people know what you do. One thing that I wanted to ask for me personally, because I've talked with artists, flatters, writers, letterers. I've yet to talk to an editor. So what's the actual day-to-day like for you when you're doing what you do?
Emails. Sending emails. So day to day, I mean, every day is a little bit different, which is part of the reason that I really like editorial. But I think it's a combination of the work I used to do when I was an administrator, as well as sort of a collaborative creative role. So I'm reviewing comics projects at every stage. So I see outlines, scripts, art at every stage, letters, and then I'll often do like marketing copy, liaising with publishers, making sure the files get where they need to go. But I'm also doing scheduling. I'm the main point of contact for my team. So if we're collecting colors and we want to get feedback from the artist and the writer on that, then everyone will send their notes to me, and then I'll just send that one note over to the colorist, for example. So it's managing workflow in that way. And as I say, managing people's schedules. If things are going to be late, I contact the publisher. It's all that kind of admin stuff that writers and artists are often very bad at dealing with.
Yes. It definitely sounds like the scope of that work is so much more than what I understood it to be and what I think the common understanding of an editor is, right? Like when I think of an editor, I think of like a prose writer handing something in and a person going with a red marker and going, "This is crap, take this out, change this."
That is part of it. This is crap part is part of it.
How often do you get to do that, and do you like it?
Well, I mean, I do, we do everything in Google Docs. It's a little bit more casual than you'll see it in like the prose world. And I'm sure their big publishers are also a little bit more formalized than I am. But yeah, I really like the collaborative part. It's like my favorite thing about being an editor, where I get to talk to creators about like their goals for their storytelling. And then we figure out how to best achieve those goals. Because I think that like one of the things that's important for someone to learn if they want to be an editor, as opposed to like say a critic or something, is understanding the difference between something that is objectively bad. Like objectively bad is too strong, but like something that doesn't work versus something that's like maybe not for you as a reader or an audience member. And so a lot of my job is saying like, okay, what is this book's particular goal? And is it achieving that most efficiently and effectively? And so obviously there's subjectivity there where I can say, well, as a reader, this was my response and this is how I would change it, or these are some options for changing it. But yeah, a lot of my work is just trying to understand what a creator wants their project to be and then helping them achieve that goal, rather than having some kind of like on high objective idea of like, this is good, this is bad. It's a little bit more collaborative than that.
Cool. Interesting. Like that's one of the things that I wanted to ask, because in your your anthology Shades of Fear. I am a big fan of Daredevil and Batman, so I've read those books that you've edited. I've actually interviewed and as a result read Dead Roman. So I've interviewed Nick. I'm interviewing Fearless Fred coming up. I guess my question, I suppose, is how do you gauge that? What is good, what works, especially in a medium where there's such difference, right? Like if you were to edit one of Jeff Lemire's book compared to Chip Zdarsky's books to say, I don't know, any other, like an indie book, say Sidekick for Hire here, how do you gauge that? Where's your barometer for like good?
So I will say, like, I have turned people down before when I think that their interests don't align with my storytelling philosophies. And I don't
Okay.
want to get into any specific examples, obviously, but there have been people where I can see that there's an audience for something, but it's not necessarily the kind of storytelling that I'm interested in. And sometimes I can see that and say, like, I just don't think I'm the right fit for this. So, as I say, there's like that subjectivity where I know what kinds of stories that I like. Like, for example, I'm really invested in really character heavy stuff, character focused stuff. And so if someone comes to me, it's a little bit different when it's the anthology model, but if we're talking about a larger project like a series or a graphic novel, if someone comes to me and they have this very like thematically driven story where the characters are kind of secondary, then like there are great pieces like that. And I certainly don't think that that's a flaw or a negative, but I know that my ability to edit well hinges a lot on like I'm very character focused. So it doesn't matter if it's like Chip doing, his Newburn book versus Fred doing this historical fiction, his semi-fiction historical story. Like in both cases, it's like, okay, with Newburn, which is a procedural mystery noir comic, I'll have questions for Chip about like the there might be stuff about the mystery and like, okay, so is this how that shook out? I might have those questions, but a lot of the time it's like, okay, but where does that put this character? What does that say about the relationship between these two characters? Is this going to come back? Like that kind of stuff. Where Fred, with Dead Romans, has this huge historical epic violence, and there's like a version of that story which very much wouldn't be for me. Like I really like the history side, but there could be like the 300 version where it's like very focused on the action. It's very focused on like
The
dudes
event.
being dudes with swords. And like there's an audience for that. And I really don't mean to be dismissive because I think that people would love it. And again, like Nick could have drawn the hell out of that and it would have been amazing. But Fred wanted me to work on it because he wanted this love story to be central. And so a lot of our conversations with Dead Romans specifically were around like, okay, let's make sure that Honoria, the love interest, feels like a person. And like we were talking about, what are her goals? What does she want? How does that put her in at odds with Arminius, the other protagonist? And so, the battle stuff, not to say I wasn't editing it. Obviously, I was keeping an eye on that and giving Nick notes and things. But yeah, we wanted to make sure that she didn't come across as like a prize, because that's a lot of the story, is that this Germanic tribe leader wants to defeat Rome and then make his girlfriend essentially a queen.
Yeah.
But he's seeing her as kind of an object. And so we like to be one, it's his prize that he wins when he wins this battle. And so we spent a lot of time talking about how to still maintain that like gritty, bloody battle tone that people want.
Yeah.
But also making sure that she felt like a person in all of this, who had her own goals and her own desires and everything. And so again, it was like Fred came to me and said, I want to make this cool action comic. That's it. I could maybe help him with that and say, okay, you want to make sure the action's rising, and we can talk about like those kinds of things. But because he had this character focus and I have this character focus, it was about like, how do we achieve your goal of making sure that the romance is really central to this story? And so a lot of my early discussions with people will be about like, what is it you want the reader to feel? Even if it's not like a theme that you can write in like a thesis statement for a grade 12 essay, you probably have a sense of like what kind of worldview your characters have, or like what the what's the why of the story? That's a question I ask a lot. Like, why are you telling this? What do you want people to take away from it? What do you want them to feel? And then it's like,
Oh,
okay,
cool.
so if that's the feeling we want someone to have, how do we make sure? Like, if that you want them to be sad, don't be cracking a bunch of jokes in the sad moment, Like, there's stuff like that that's intuitive, but I think a lot of it's just about how to maximize the feelings that people that the writer or the creator wants the reader to feel, if that makes
And
sense.
yeah, absolutely. So I would also imagine then along with that, you are very well likely responsible for I guess the proper pacing of story as well. Like knowing when to, okay, this action scene needs to end so that we can actually showcase a romance, say in Dead Romans, or on one of Zdarsky's books. Okay, we need to, something needs to get really crazy and weird and offset our reader, and then we have to ground it in some form of knowledge and reality. So yeah, I suppose, like I said, do you feel anyway that you're responsible for pacing?
It can be. I think I've had a more, just based on the people I've worked with, I think I've had more of a more conscious conversations about pacing with short stories. Because
Okay.
with longer ones, I think people have a sense of like 2 to 3 pages kind of makes a scene in a 20-page comic. So I think people tend to have a stronger hold on that already.
Mm.
But when it's short and you have to tell a story in like 8, 10, 15 pages, then figuring out where we need to put the most focus narratively, or where things need to slow down and have like a big splash page, like that kind of thing. I think the pacing gets a little bit tricky when you have to like really have a lot of economy with the story that you're telling. So I think like I definitely have had those conversations, but I think more often in the like really short form space.
Like a floppies and stuff.
Well, even shorter than that, I would say like in the anthology space where I'm doing like I've
Oh
done
yeah.
Shades of Fear was my 5th or 6th anthology that I edited. So
Oh, it was
it's
too. Yeah.
yeah. So I've been doing those like that format for a lot longer than the floppies and the 20 pagers. So
Yeah.
yeah, we're
Like a
really
lot.
happy with how it turned out.
I'm glad. I'm happy with how it turned out. It's a really cool book.
Thank you.
Yeah, like some of these are 16 pages. Some of them, trying to do quick math here, 20 pages. So yeah, they're like sub floppy books.
Yeah,
Um,
12 to 16 for the most part in that book, but in previous I've had like as short as 6 to 8 pages for stories. So,
Fair.
yeah.
Cool. So then an important question. We're at about the 15-ish minute mark, or 13 or whatever. But I always like to ask around now, tell us about your book, the thing that you're
Yeah.
selling. Because while I would love to pick your brain about editing all day long, I also want to know about your stuff. So what is Shades of Fear?
So Shades of Fear is a collection of psychological horror comics with a focus on color. So we wanted to make sure that color was
Oh,
integral to the approach of telling a story. So not necessarily that like it features in the story in a concrete way, but that we're looking at ways that color can be used within a narrative to evoke responses. So often fear, but also disgust and surprise, and how we can use color consciously to elicit those emotions at readers in a horror context.
huh. I feel so silly now because I never pieced that together. Um, and now that
Maybe our back cover copy should have been stronger. Then that might be on me.
you know what, I have a bad habit of just diving into a book. So for me, um, I leaned into the fear part. I'm not a big horror person. I don't
Mm.
like horror movies. The only thing of Stephen King I've read is The Gunslinger because I thought that was a really cool Western. Um, so when people give me horror books, often I'm like, okay. And I'll read it, right? Especially if they send it to me and they're like, hey, can I come on the show? Can I
Mhm,
promote my
mhm.
book? I'm like, yeah. But I do it. Um, so I guess with Shades of Fear, though, like you said, you're focusing on color thematically as a visual, not crutch, but as a
A
representation.
tool, yeah, a
Yeah,
visual tool.
thank you. You'll notice I lack some of the language that maybe you'll know.
No
Um,
worries.
how do I even start the questions? Because some of these stories spooked the hell out of me.
I'm so glad to hear that. That was the intention, so I'm glad that it worked.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I guess, you know what I'll ask is, what's the difference between editing an anthology such as Shades of Fear compared to a series or a graphic novel? Because it's not one creator, it's many.
Yes. So there are a lot of moving pieces in anthologies, and as I say, I kind of got my start there. In terms of having like really heavy duty editorial responsibilities. So it's a lot more. You have to be really on top of it, which isn't to say you don't in the series space, but it's a little bit easier to be like, okay, you know, my colorist and my letterer, I have to hear back from them. But when you have to manage this many people, and in other books we've had multiple people on teams, and then you have 10 of those or 15 of those or 17 of those. So making sure all of those people know what's going on, and that's tricky. But there's also all of the responsibilities around like making sure it gets printed and fulfilling the Kickstarter and running the Kickstarter and all that stuff. So I think that there's just, you have to be really on top of the project management, because there's just a lot more moving pieces and a lot more just stuff that you're responsible for that with a traditional published project, you know, like Image publishes some of these books. They are responsible for that. They put it in Diamond. They get it out there, and that's nice. So, but yeah, with something like Shades of Fear, like I did almost all the administrative editing. My one of the contributors, Ashanti Fordson, also co-edited it with me, and they were really helpful with a lot of the creative editing, a lot of the fulfillment. But a lot of the sort of day-to-day admin was sort of on my shoulders. So yeah, I just that part of it was a lot of work. But I'm very happy with how the book came out. We were really lucky to work with some really amazing creators. So it was definitely worth all the work.
Good. And actually, that would be Ashanti's story in your book.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Yeah.
They were busy doing an amazing story. So I was like, I will do the emails. You make this amazing book. And Ashanti also did all of the interstitial illustrations.
Oh, okay.
One of our goals with this book was to, I think a lot of anthologies may have a lot of really good stories in them, but they can sometimes feel like a bunch of stories that don't connect to each other, that just sort of exist in a collective context. And so we were hoping to make this one feel a little bit more cohesive by having a very specific tone we were looking for, but we also tried to use those illustrations to sort of move from one story comfortably into the next. And again, like Ashanti's just like, they're mine. It's amazing. They're so talented. And so, yeah, they did all of the illustrations between the stories as well, which I hope helps to make it feel like a bit of a more cohesive beginning to end thing than like a pick it up and, you know, peck at the stories as you will, which is how I usually read short story collections.
Yeah, fair. I am going to try very hard not to spoil the last page of one of these stories, but show. So you're talking about that type of illustration, correct?
Yes, precisely. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And then there are some more pinup style illustrations, which were done by Amber Huff, but the more simple, that's not even the correct word, but the more limited palette, the more limited palette illustrations between the stories. Those
like
were all Ashanti. Yeah, like that one.
That's so cool. Then I guess as an editor, previously when I've spoken with folks putting together an anthology, one of my favorite questions, because they had put out like a wide net of just, hey, we want to make an anthology, send us your stuff. They had a very vague and open criteria, which was basically LGBTQ style stories, BIPOC stories, indigenous stories, and just like give it all to us. And they went through and the question I asked was, how do you whittle it down? What becomes the final bit? Now, this is a thick anthology. Like, it's a good sized book. According to the official website, which actually I'm going to share now so people can see it. Yes, and Shades of Fear. So if someone wanted to buy a PDF copy, they could go ahead and go to the website on screen, which is linked from your website, AllisonO'Toole.com.
Yes.
So the size of this, it's 179 pages. I appreciate there's a couple of pages in the front for like the legalese and some of that setup drawings, and same thing in the back. But that's a lot of comic. When you started this process, did you already know these are the teams we want, or was it again a wide net of let's see what we can get together? How'd that
Yeah.
go?
So I've done both models. Ashanti and I actually first worked together on another book, along with Kat Vendetti,
Oh.
called Wayward Kindred, which we did for our Teo Comics Press. And thank you. We really liked working together, so we decided to do this book. On that one was the model I've used with most of my anthologies, where I have a theme, so it's a little bit more specific than you were kind of describing. Like with that one, I wanted stories about family using monsters as metaphor, basically. And so with something like that, we go through all the stories and you basically like whittle it down to your favorites, which will be too many. So then you have to whittle it down further by saying like, where are we kind of repeating ground without stories kind of speaking to each other? So if it's a monster book, you may say, okay, well, we have 3 vampire stories, so maybe we'll lose one of the vampire stories. Or like we have 3 stories about sisters and we don't have any, like we only have one with brothers, or a brother and it's like whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it's just about making sure that there's variety of like tone, because you don't like with something like this, you don't want it to be entirely light, because we're not necessarily writing this to like a really young audience, but you also don't necessarily want to have a whole story about like abuse or something that's like heavier. So it was trying to figure out how to balance having variety, having stories that kind of speak to each other in interesting ways, having a variety of like voices and figures represented, like all that kind of stuff has to be considered. But with Shades of Fear, we took kind of a different approach where Ashanti and I, because the color was so integral to the execution of the whole piece, we decided to only work with single cartoonists. Shannon Wright hired a flatter, Kyrie Saintilis. But other than that, it was all solo creators. Because as I say, like we wanted the pitch for the story to come with a very clear idea of how the story would eventually look. And so the one you're just showing, like Olivia Stevens had said, well, in horror, we don't often get like pastel colors. So she wanted to work with like really pastel, pale pinks and greens and see how we can evoke horror with this really non-traditional horror palette, for example. And so we reached out to a group of people, like a mix of creators whose work was already really strong with horror. Like Olivia, who's been doing like a werewolf romance comic called Darlin that's amazing, that I highly recommend you check out. But then we also had folks like Tess Reed, who did the last story in the anthology, who like hasn't done a lot of horror, but has really strong, like everyone in the book has really strong color ideas and really strong color work. So we wanted a mix again of making sure everybody was really strong with color, because that was our main thing, but then a mix of people who are really into the horror genre and people who maybe don't work with it as much, and so they'd have like a really different perspective. So that was kind of how we put this one together.
I like that, and thank you for keeping that in mind when doing it, because I imagine it would be really easy just to go, oh, these are our top horror folks, let's get them on it and go. Because yeah, like the story I showed there, oh boy, now I gotta find it. There it is, which is titled
Hyssop. It's a flower. It's a plant.
Yes. I think this is my personal favorite. I'm not gonna dare ask you what yours is, because I'm sure in some capacity you love them all.
Yeah, I couldn't choose.
Yeah. But this one's my personal favorite just because of the twist at the end. Again, no spoilers. Folks out there, on screen is where you can get the book. Please do it.
I will also say, you can, if you want a physical copy of the book, you can get one through Radiator Comics or through Radi Incantati, which is a a delivery or like they're a web store that hosts a lot of like RPG modules and books and zines. And also, if you're in Toronto, there are copies at the Sidekick and the Silver Snail. So you can get physical copies as well. I can send some links later that you can pop under the video.
For sure. Actually, I'm going to really quickly. So that is one of them.
That's correct.
And
Radiator Comics, which is good if you're in the US.
Radiator Comics. I love doing this and getting to speak with folks like you because you know all the stuff I don't know or know.
Well, I have to be we all have to be our own hype men, right? So we all have all this stuff on lock.
Oh, absolutely. That's so cool. All right. Then I think, Alice, my next question for you then is, when you're going through 4 Shades of Fear, was there a particular order that you wanted to set them up in? Or did that matter? Because that's something that when building it, I'm always curious because you would obviously want to maintain some sort of flow, something that's easy to start with, perhaps, to get people going. So how do you determine stuff like that?
Oh, wow. So long conversations. What I've done on all my anthologies is like myself and my co-editor or co-editors will each come up with a story order ourselves, and then we'll like hop on a call and sort of hash it out. But so the things I think about are, I try to start with like the opener and the closer. In Shades of Fear, we open with Jay Zhang's story, which we chose because it's almost like a poem. It's very ethereal. It feels like it felt like a good calling card for the anthology because it shows you right away that we're not necessarily only interested in very narrative driven comics. There are some in there, but we definitely were interested in like psychology and ambiguity. Mm-hmm. And so we thought this was a good one to kind of get you going on that. And with the limited palette, it's very clear that we're playing with color, I thought. And so again, then to contrast that, we chose Molly Mendoza's story. This one goes out to you second, because the Technicolor of that couldn't be further from the limited palette. So again, we thought that those two contrasted each other really well. And then from there, we won't go into Joy Sand's Turtleneck, which you could say is another story kind of about obsession. So we noticed that was sort of a theme of the first 3 stories. And then we go from there. But basically, it's often sort of tent poling with the beginning and the end. So we wanted to end with Tess Reed's, just without spoiling things. We just like the way that story goes out, and we thought it would be a really effective ending for the book as a whole. Mm-hmm. And then from in there, it was looking at, as I say, sometimes it's contrasting styles so that there's a clear, like a really clean break in your mind between the stories. So both artistic styles and storytelling styles, we wanted to feel a little bit different story to story. Yeah. And also finding ways to, for stories to speak to each other a little bit. So as I say, like Molly's and Joy's together, I think there's a really clear connection there of like obsession. And then the next few, we have some like family dynamics and complicated family dynamics and things like that. So that was sort of how we put this one together. But I think in general, I kind of will plot a few stories out that feel like anchors and then work from there.
Nice. That's really cool. Like one thing I noticed, and again, I'm not super dialed in necessarily all the time, but when I was reading it and when I hit Turtleneck, it sort of felt like, oh, okay, I'm now into like the body horror stage, because it was like 1 or 2 stories where it was like, oh yeah, okay, we're thematically we're set, and then it sort of kept moving on, and it was just like, okay, this is going to be a creepy, no fun time book for Conrad.
Yeah.
I mean, but what I found so interesting, and I think Turtleneck is the one that sort of blew my mind, was the first 2 stories, the colors are very strong. it's got sharp lines, like it feels very comic booky.
Mhm.
And then this one doesn't. Like it could be like a kid's book. It's got that watercolor feel to it, which I'm pretty certain that's how it was drawn.
Yeah, it's
Um,
watercolor and pencil crayon.
oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Like it, so
Joy's a mad
it's
lad.
yeah, it's ultimate, just like soft, nice palette
Mhm.
colors. It feels comfortable, and then like stuff just starts going, and you're like, oh
Mhm.
god, I am in this now. Um, I guess we're 30 minutes in. For the folks who want to go out and buy this, like I said, they go to AllisonO'Toole.com. They can see your whole library, learn a cool bunch of stuff about you, and get links to get Shades of Fear as well as
Mhm.
your other stuff. Um, if someone's on the fence about just what we've talked about, um, what would you say? If you like X, you'll like Shades of Fear.
If you like, psychological horror. So if you like, we were inspired by Giallo film. We were inspired by Emily Carroll. We were inspired by Park Chan Wook's whole filmography.
Ugh.
If you like ornate, decadent, Penny Dreadful on Showtime, another inspiration, that kind of feeling in your horror. And if you like people that are trying experimental comics, trying different forms of comics, different things you can achieve with comics, then I think you will like Shades of Fear.
Fair. Absolutely. Um, then I guess my next question for you is going to be, um, now that, because you've done anthologies, you've done graphic novels, you've done floppies,
Mm-hmm.
what's the difference between them? And maybe like even to split hairs even further, what's the difference between like a one-shot 24-page comic, an ongoing series, graphic novel, and anthology?
I think it's kind of what we talked about earlier, where it's mostly like the economy of the storytelling. Like it's just
Okay.
at the end of the day, it's space, right? And so I think you can tell a story, like you could probably tell the same story in uh each of those different formats. It would just look quite different.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But I think that it's a lot of just like how much space you have, and that like lets you compress or decompress. You can have more beats and more complexity, obviously, in a longer story. Um, but yeah, I think it's mostly just pacing in terms of how things are presented. Because again, like you can have 100 pages as a graphic novel or 100 pages as a series, a 5-issue
Mhm.
series, and you're just thinking about how to pace so that there's like cliffhangers that are more dramatic than they would need to be if you could just turn the page the next day.
Yeah, really.
um, but I think that's the primary difference. And I think, you can tell a more complex story usually with more space. That's not um, exclusively true, but as a generalization, I think you can just kind of have more things happen when you have
Yeah.
more space. But I think that's like the major difference, honestly. And then again, the stuff I talked about before in terms of just the admin that's required. But we don't need to rehash that stuff. No one wants to hear about
Fair.
spreadsheets.
Oh god. I mean, you know what? There is a very select group of people who are now dying to hear about them.
they
Um,
they can they can tweet at me or go to my website. I'm happy to share my spreadsheets.
I love it. Um, then you know what? One thing I did want to touch on, and mostly the question came about because I was going through your social media, and sort of thinking back to the first time we met. I don't know if you remember, but the first time we met was at Sidekick like
I
five
do
years
remember.
ago. Oh, thank you. That's good. So one thing that I think is super cool about you, and to some extent, I'm like everyone I talk to, it happens, but I think you're really prominent with it is um, your investment in your time and energy that you put into not only making comics but fostering community for comics, being vocal about certain things, helping spread the word, like with Canadian Comics Open Library,
Hmm.
with certain events that are going on. I didn't see anything from like Comicsgate because that was so long ago, but I'm quite confident you probably had something to say about it. Um, when it comes to that sort of sense of community, what drives that in you?
Ooh, probably just my type A personality. Honestly, I don't know. I think a lot of us come from a lot, I think that like nerd culture has become kind of mainstream
Oh yeah.
over the past 10 years, but a friend of mine, Lynn Darrow, who writes a very good comic called Shade Runners. She once described herself as a niche person rather than a nerd. And I kind of think of myself that
Niche.
way, where yeah, like I think I'm definitely a big dweeb, but I find that like there's a lot of nerdy stuff that even I am like, oh no, I prefer my like weird niche communities. Like, I don't play any video games, but would love to talk to anybody about 19th century British romantic poetry. And I feel
Oh.
like there are a lot of people like that, right? And so even those of us who are like big nerds, and some of us may see ourselves very much in the mainstream, but I think all of us that make comics were probably dorks when we were kids who
Oh
like
yeah.
sometimes felt left out, right? And so I think a lot of us, like, we put a lot of ourselves into the things that we love. And then doubly when you're a creator and you're putting yourself into something that you love. Uh, and so I think that we just naturally, I don't know, I naturally seek community because when I love
Hmm.
something, I want to share it with people. And again, that's either when it's something that I'm a fan of. I may or may not have like a group chat right now where we're just sending into across the Spider-Verse memes. Because that's just my natural inclination. But I think also, yeah, when you're making things and you want to share and say like, hey, does this work? Or hey, what's this publisher like to work with? Or hey, can you have a look at my script? Like whatever it is. And I like to see everybody else's work, and that's why that's why I'm volunteering at the Canada Comics Open Library. And so I think that I just naturally seek community, and so I want other people to have that, especially on the creator side, because like I wouldn't be where I am without the community in Toronto. And I got here because Jason Lowe asked me to edit The Pitiful Human Lizard when he was putting it up on Kickstarter. And from
Oh.
there, I met folks who were doing like at Teal Comics Press and got on the Toronto Comics anthologies. And like it's just from meeting people and working with people that I've been able to get where I am. And so I'm really eager to sort of pay it forward and pass that along, and to get to meet more people that are making cool comics that I get to read. So I'm really passionate about it because I think it's important. And I think for people who spend all their time in front of a desk making things and not going places, that finding ways to foster community where we can come together and like emerge from our hovels is really valuable.
Okay. um, what
There
a
was a
good way to
lot
put
there.
that.
Sorry.
No, honestly, I love it, and just the way that you said that, emerge from our hovels, that was perfect. Speaking of emerging from hovels, maybe this is
Mhm.
the impossible question because everyone is so different. Um, for 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 the nerd out there who's watching, who has not yet gone out to a comic shop, doesn't know of comic community. Maybe it's one of those people that, for whatever reason, they've just done like free comics online, like Webtoons, or the certain sites that somehow get copies of new comics up there and you can read them for free. For those folks out there who haven't found that connection yet, what would you recommend?
So we're lucky in Toronto because we have a lot of events. And I think that we're starting to see those popping up again. For folks who live more rurally, I know that my advice and my experience isn't as applicable, but if you can, I think finding events in your city, like finding the comic shops that are in your city and see when they're doing signings, when they're doing maybe little zine fairs that they might be promoting. I think that those kinds of things are really good. Sometimes they'll have like book clubs that you can go to where you can read and talk about a comic. Your local library might also have events like that, and drawing classes and comics classes specifically if you're lucky. But I always recommend that people just try to use Facebook if you have to, or Twitter or Instagram, and look at what the organizations that exist where you live, what they are doing and what they are putting on, because those events are really good ways to meet other nerds. And like I met early on, like I was meeting people at like Comic Cons even, but also yeah, like signings for anthologies by local creators, and like comic jam nights and things like that. So I think any city would have things like that. I would just say, yeah, like look for your local comic shops, look for your local libraries, keep an eye on their events, and go out and meet other nerds.
I love it. That's so cool. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
my pleasure. And if not, like a lot of them have been pivoting to digital content, so like digital hangouts and stuff. So hopefully that stuff's available if you're not in a city where you can't like get out to the physical spaces.
What I will say on that is I have noticed recently a lot of comic shops are getting into Discord and making Discord spaces. Very cool. If you're not yet on Discord, I imagine the younger people are, but if you're not yet, check it out. I know a bunch of people who are like, I don't do Discord. I'm too old. It scares me. I'm kind of on the fence with that one. So, you know,
I use it, but I find it very overwhelming.
yeah, exactly. God, that's funny. When it comes to sort of the stories that you edit, that you choose to edit, is there a particular genre that you prefer, or is it just sort of go with the flow?
It's a little go with the flow. I'll choose often if it's someone that I want to work with. So I'm a little bit more open, but
Okay.
I'll pretty much always take a book on like if it's about monsters and their friends or it's romance. I'm pretty upfront about that on Twitter, I think. I love monster stories and I love horror in general. Although, again, as I say, I'm a little bit more interested in psychological and character driven horror than like stuff that's really slashery or really extreme or very cynical. And again, there's an audience for that, but my preference is a little bit more. I want there to be emotion in the horror. And I also really love slice of life. I want to edit more slice of life. Like mostly the only one I've done was Andrew Wheeler's Love and War comic for Comixology. And I got to do another one for Comixology that I took on sort of halfway through the project called Turtle Bread, which was a lot of fun. But I want to do, if anybody's out there, I want to do more slice of life because that's my favorite manga to read. So I want there to be more. So those genres in general will like usually pique my interest. But I would say, yeah, I'm if there's someone I want to work with, then I'm more willing to go kind of outside my comfort zone. But like, yeah, I'm not a big like action focused unless it's with someone I really like. I don't really want to do superheroes. I don't really read a lot of hard sci-fi, so I feel ill-equipped to edit it.
Fair. Very fair.
Things like that. But yeah, I'll do almost anything if it's with a creator whose work I like or like is my friend and I trust it will work well together.
That's really cool. What to ask next? I guess you know what. Well, I'll ask sort of the one that it's one of the ones that I wrote up for you, which is for a hopeful creator that's out there now, maybe watching this, whether it's live now with us or sometime down the road because this will be up on YouTube. How would you recommend someone find a editor for their work? Whether it's if someone was coming to you, like what would you want from them to be able to properly figure out if you want to work with them, and how would you recommend they go approaching that?
So in terms of finding one, I get everything through social media, which is why I'm terrified of the inevitable death march that Twitter is on, because that's a very easy way to find people. I think like portfolio days, visible women, and other like spotlight days like that. You can find editors that way. I get a lot of people who will just see my name in a book and reach out. So if there's an anthology that you read and you like it, or even a mainstream book that you read and you like it, you might be able to find that editor. Of course, different people have different relationships to taking on new work, like unsolicited work, but
yeah,
that's a starting point. But when you reach out personally, I will ask for more information about like what the story is, what it's about. If you have a pitch, that's great. If you don't, like, give me a couple of sentences just telling me kind of what the tone is. as well as like what your goals are with it. So is it a webcomic? Do you want to pitch it to some publishers? Do you have an artist attached? Like any of that information. And then, as I say, I can kind of gauge from there, like if I think it's a good fit for my editorial like interests and abilities. If not, I'll often try to recommend somebody else. And also, of course, like if I have the bandwidth at the particular time that you need an editor. But yeah, I would say just like you don't need to go overboard, but just basic, like what is your goal with it? What is it about? Do you have a team involved? And if there's something specific you want from the editor, like do you want help developing the story? Some people just want a set of eyes on a script. Some people are like, I'm ready to bring this to a publisher and we just need you on board to help project manage, some clarity on what you're actually looking for is helpful as well. Because if you just want someone to like copy edit it, essentially, that's a very different gig than like editing a whole graphic novel or whatever.
Yeah, it's like that's why it's so cool for me to get to talk to you, because I had never realized that an editor did so much more than just make sure everything's spelled right. Does it all make visual sense? Is there any like watches suddenly not on someone's wrist in the next shot? Like that kind of continuity stuff. So it's so cool to learn like there's so much more to it. I haven't been able to ask this to folks in a long time. I just don't think I just had it in my mind, but I'm so curious. So a bit of a story time for you.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I saw your name in a book, I didn't actually realize it, but I read Sex Crims, and I really liked Sex Crims.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read Pitiful Human Lizard, and that's when I noticed Allison O'Toole, and I was like, oh, cool. I know that person. And then all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, you're in Sex Crims. And then it was like, oh, wait a minute, you're in T.O. Comics Press. And then like next thing you're popping up, and it was like, oh, you're in Dead Romans. And I'm like, what? You kind of just like everything that I was just reading just had a coincidence. You were editing, and it was like, what the hell's going on? So you sort of touched on it earlier by just being social, getting yourself out there. But what made you want to get into editing?
So just point of order, I wasn't on Sex Criminals. It's a great comic. You might have read White Trees, which I copy edited. I just don't want to take credit for work that I didn't do.
Fair. Very fair.
But I do love Sex Criminals. I was at the launch party. It was a fun time.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was the best. I didn't even know Chip at the time. I actually met him later. Different. That's a story for another time. But I actually, so when I graduated from university in 2013, and honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had thought about doing like review and criticism because I was really interested in, again, like interacting with people's work. And so at the time I was writing reviews for various now defunct websites that didn't pay me anything.
Ew. Well,
that's
all right.
That's comics. That is what it is.
Yeah.
And honestly, I was an amateur, so it's fine. It was a good way to like get your start when you've just graduated and you're trying to figure out what you want to do. So it's okay.
Yeah.
And so I was writing reviews, and as I said, like Jason Lowe was getting back into comics, and we'd become friends through like the cosplay community in Toronto. And he said he like trusted my opinion and just wanted a second set of eyes on Human Lizard before I went to print. And so I said, okay, cool. And then I had been editing at the websites a little bit, so I was starting to get a glimpse of what that could look like. Again, I'm just a type A person, as I said, and it was like, well, they need someone, and I guess I can do it. And I started
I love
to learn.
The confidence.
Yeah, well, when it's these like things that are thrown together through passion and not money, then it's not, they often it's a sense of like they need help and someone needs to step in. So I could maybe be that person because I already had a relationship with some of the editorial at that point. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I started to get an idea of like what the job entailed. And as I also mentioned, I was working as an administrator at the time. And so I realized that my administrative jobs were very similar to a lot of what editing was. And I had spent 4 years studying literature and thinking about storytelling there, and like in an academic way, and now in kind of a critical website funny way. And so I was like, oh, this actually is like a good marriage of two things I really love, which is like collaborating with storytelling, as well as like the admin stuff, which I know I can do, and I know is something that other people don't want to do. So it was a good,
Yep.
But like, and I don't even mean that in a, like, I sometimes tease, but I don't mean it in a derogatory way. Like, if you're focused on creating a thing, you don't necessarily want to be doing all this other extraneous stuff, right? So it's good to be able to offload that onto someone that can worry about it for you. And so, yeah, I just like, I realized that this was a niche I could fill that would sort of speak to my skills. And so I kind of went from there. And then you're just mentioning all these books that are just by people in Toronto, which is honestly how it happened. Like Jason interned for Chip when Jason was in university. And so they had been wanting to do a book together forever. And Chip was just busy doing like a 10 million books at Marvel. And so then when he reached out to Jason to work together, I kind of came in on that package because like Chip and I had met, and we'd he was aware of like the Toronto comic stuff. He did one of our forwards. He basically donated a silly meme that he'd made for a Frankenstein based scene that I'd done. So like we'd met and we knew each other, and but yeah, it just like it came together and we worked really well together. And like I met Fred Kennedy through Comic Cons years ago, and that's how I mentioned Andrew Wheeler earlier. We also met just like through the comics community in Toronto. And so a lot of this is genuinely just going to places and meeting people and then working together, often because I'm the only editor they know. So that works out great for me.
I mean, talk about a niche thing. Like I said, even myself, where I've spent 5, 6, I don't know, a number of years interviewing folks who make comics, and editing is obviously a part of all that. I still don't know like what an editor fully does. Like, you've helped fill a lot of that out for me, but it's like, I'm sure there's stuff that maybe you don't even think about that you do, that you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually something, so like it's fascinating. Are you lucky enough that like is it your full-time job now? Are you just freelance editing everything, or do you also have a day job?
Right now I'm lucky to be full-time freelance. And a lot of that I'm just so blessed by this working relationship I have with Chip, where he just like has enough books that can very much keep me afloat for a year. And so I can, that's not a full-time gig, but it means that like I have a guarantee of several books on my plate at a time, and I'll sometimes help him out with just like administrative stuff. And so I always know that I have that, and so I can pad that with other projects like Dead Romans, like some other stuff that'll be announced later this year. And I'm very, very lucky in that way, I think. And this year I'm also traveling, trying to like go to other shows, meet more people. So there's still that like hustle culture thing, but yeah, I'm very blessed to be able to do it full time.
That's fantastic. Good for you, Allison.
Thank you.
We are hitting to the end of the show. We got about 5 minutes left. So I guess maybe the answer is I don't for this one, but what are you currently reading?
I do. I try to read as often as I can. I just finished Girl Juice by Benji Nate, which I loved and will recommend. I'd been reading it like on Twitter, but it's nice to be like actually holding the book in your hands. I just started a book by Susumu Katsumata, I believe is the name. It's called Fukushima Devilfish, and it's a bunch of comics about like specifically focused on like nuclear power in Japan in like the 70s era, I think. I've just started reading it, so I can't speak on it too much. But yeah, I try to keep things pretty eclectic. And again, seeing Spider-Verse has also reminded me that I like superhero comics, so I've borrowed the digital editions of some Kelly Thompson Hawkeye books that I'm excited to read.
Good choice. What was the title of the second book you mentioned about?
It is called Fukushima Devilfish. It's
Oh.
printed beautifully, and you can see, yeah, this blue. It's in white and blue, and it's stunning.
Oh,
And
I
I'm
love
very
that.
excited to read more of it. And I found it at the Canada Comics Open Library. Had never heard of it. Thought it looked really cool, and I hope that maybe this will encourage some other folks to check it out because it's a beautiful book.
Hell yes. And go to the Canada Comics Open Library, people. It
Yeah,
is very accessible, easy to get to. If I'm not mistaken, it's on like a major bus line
it's on
downtown.
Bathurst, like 2
Yeah.
blocks north of Bloor, so really easy to get to if you're in Toronto.
Yeah, and it's a cool space. You are allowed to go hang out. You get access to a bunch of books. It's basically uh, a donation gets you a membership.
Hmm.
So go enjoy.
Yeah, take out comics, especially comics that you wouldn't be able to get through the Toronto Public Library system. We got a lot of zines and that kind of thing, so
Yeah.
a very different collection, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's super cool. Jordan is working so hard to catalog and make that such a nice place.
Yes, it's going to be amazing once we get all the books into the system and we can like focus on other stuff. But we're working on it. It's going to be good.
Yeah, I interviewed Rodham. Oh God, I don't know how long ago now, and I remember that's when they were starting the barcodes and the
Mm-hmm.
cataloging, and they're still working on it.
Yes.
Yeah. We have a question that's come in that I
Oh,
think is
wonderful.
going to be hilarious. Another YouTuber, Actual Dracula, has asked, "How similar is editing Chip to herding cats?"
You know what? The main thing with Chip that's like that is that he says yes to too much. And
Oh,
so he is too nice and commits to too many things. And I worry he's gonna die. But he's actually really good to work with. Like he's got his goof ass persona, but he's actually he's very professional
oh,
and is very aware that he's very much a part of a team. And so right now he's mostly writing. He's drawing public domain, but everything else he's just writing. And he knows that like the rest of the people in his team cannot work if they don't have scripts. And so as much as possible, he's like really diligent about making sure that people get things when they need them. When I need things from him, he's as
wow.
timely as possible. He's as timely as he can be getting notes back to people. Like he's extremely busy. Which again, sometimes it's like chip, we need this thing. But it's never like forgetfulness or malice. It's just that he has too much on his plate because he's a really good writer. But yeah, he's a really good collaborator and one who I think is very generous with his time and very conscious of making sure that everyone else on the team has what they need.
That's
So
super
yeah,
cool.
he's actually not too bad to work with. There are others I've worked with that are much more like herding cats and anthologies, which to nobody's fault are just always like that because of how much how much complexity there is there.
That's so cool. Another thing I want to ask, this is more of an admin question, and I'm sorry if you're bored of these. Uh, Given that, because if I'm not mistaken, Chip's on like a tour now.
He just
Um,
got back.
he just got back. Okay,
Yeah.
so while he was on his tour, was he still working, and were you having to like chase him down for stuff, or was it like, I got all my stuff done, and now I'm gonna go have fun, see people, and then come back?
A little bit of both. I think he had some really pressing Marvel DC deadlines. So as I say, like I don't touch that stuff because they have editors that do
Yeah.
that, so I don't need to worry about it. But I know he was working, like he definitely had his tablet with him, but that was all.
Mm.
And so yeah, that was like the most quiet period from him, I guess. But we're catching up a little bit right now, but mostly on stuff where we have a little bit more flexibility on the deadlines, whereas like the Marvel DC, like once you get going, you need to keep going.
Mm.
But we're a little bit further out with some of the stuff that we were waiting on, so it's not as severe if things are late. So we're making it work.
I dig it. Glad to hear it. Glad life is not stressful because of it. Uh, Maybe again, being a fan of both Daredevil and Batman, which he's currently writing, um, if the offer came up, would you want to edit them or another Marvel or DC? No. Oh,
No,
okay.
not at all. Chip knows I'm not reading his superhero stuff, and that I in fact mocked him for his notes on Batman. Um, I've never read a Batman comic. I'm not going to do it now. Is the
Fair.
honest truth. I mocked him lovingly, I should say. I'm not mean. Uh, but like it's stuff that like out of context sounds so goofy, and I just don't have the emotional connection to a lot of
Mm,
those characters. And even I used to read superhero stuff a lot more prolifically than I do right now. And even then, as I said, like I'm just niche, and I would get really interested in weird side characters, and I just not so much in the main books.
yeah.
So like I loved Fraction and Aya's Hawkeye, which everybody loved, but like there were a whole bunch of other books that I just fell off of really quickly. Like I think
Mhm.
Longshot is a fun character and I'd like to read about Longshot. I don't really care about Captain America. And I think a lot of the work on the superhero properties, like any IP properties, is just like managing the brand. And so much of it is
Oh,
on like there are all these there's rules, right, about like what you can do with characters. Like you can't use this guy, he's dead, or he's in space, or whatever. Or like,
yeah.
no, we changed his costume in this arc and now it has to look like this. And all of that kind of stuff. Like I understand if you like really grew up with these characters and they mean a lot to you, like I completely understand the appeal of working there, but like I didn't in the same way. Like I watched the
Yeah.
movies, but I didn't really read the superhero comics. So the idea of having my work and my creator's work constrained by all these rules just sounds exhausting to me.
Interesting.
And I think it's also hard because they inherently you can't change things. Everything has to be change backable, and it's just not really the kind of storytelling that I'm interested in. So
Fair.
I don't know. Maybe if they were like, we'll give you 85,000 American dollars a year, like then I'd be like, sure, man, whatever, I'll
Yeah,
edit
yeah, yeah. Why
whatever.
not? I can
But
do
I don't
that.
think that would happen because it's comics. So I think that no, I don't really want to work on any IP stuff because it seems like a lot of trouble and less creatively fulfilling for what I'm interested in from comics.
You know what? That's such a good answer, and it really resonates with me because uh, I I mean I've been reading comics for a long time now, but I officially started collecting floppies in 2011 with the new 52, and as of about 2 years ago, I hit a point with Batman specifically because I was a big Batman kid, and it was just like the story does this. Uh,
Yeah,
like a little bit
yeah.
changes, but it's basically cyclical. And I there was a quote from Scott Snyder as he was ending his run on Batman with Capullo there, where he's like, "Yeah, so with that last issue, we really put all the toys back in the chest and gave it to the next person to do their
Yes.
thing." And I'm like, I dig that, but I think yeah, that what you were talking about that leads to very dry storytelling in the long run. And I'm sure as an editor, like you said, all this stuff that you're used to working on, you want niche things, interesting things, they'll stall that out. So good for you for being so clear on what you do want to work on and what you don't want to work on in general.
Yeah, I think I'm just like I'm finding myself more and more interested in the small press space where we can just give people the flexibility and the space to tell whatever story in whatever
Yeah.
format and not be as constrained by what sells in a like a direct market comic shop that sells floppies, which is an important part of the comics market but only a part of it. And the stuff that I find myself gravitating more towards is like stuff that's a little bit more complete or a little bit more unusual.
Hmm.
And also, to be honest, I think just like more geared toward an audience that isn't necessarily like attached to specific IP characters. Like I don't want to slam anybody for liking what they like, and I think there's a lot of really fun stuff, and I totally understand why people love it. Like I'll go to bat whenever anybody asks me about my favorite superhero comics. I talk about the Vision and Scarlet Witch comic Volume 2 from the 80s.
Oh, okay.
And I love it deeply, so I completely understand why people have that connection. But I think that there's a lot of storytelling that like doesn't have adult women specifically at like its ideal target audience. And I
Yeah.
find particularly I only started reading manga maybe 5 years ago, and seeing how much stuff is made for and by and about adult women's daily lives, I was like, oh, we can do this in comics.
Oh, yeah.
And I find myself increasingly interested in more that kind of demo and looking at just yeah, like a different style of storytelling. I find
Mhm.
myself less interested in a lot of the genre stuff. And there are so many other people out there who love it and are amazing at editing it, and I will leave them to do that because they will do it better than I will. And I can try to sort of sort out my niche and stay in that playground where I get really excited about the stuff I'm working on.
Perfect. Well, then I will ask a small favor of you, and that is simply if you can convince someone or find someone that's more likely, I figure, because you're so busy doing what you're doing already. Uh, find someone that wants to make a slice of life comic. Because, yeah, I agree. Slice of life is a big um it's a joy of mine. I enjoy those stories. For those who don't know what slice of life means, maybe you've only read American comics. Basically, it's I find them episodic generally, but
Mhm.
it's literally like slice of life. Like my favorite current example is um the what is it? The Journey of the House Husband. Um
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm saying this the
Way
title
of the
wrong.
House Husband. Yes.
Thank you. And I find that very funny, and it's overly dramatic, and it's ridiculous, and it is definitely not like the most emotionally mature or um fantastic slice of life comic out there. It's just one that I know because it's funny to me.
It's very
Um
funny. It's a good
yeah.
one. Yeah.
But I would definitely love to see more of that in the Western style of comics. So I don't know,
Yeah.
push someone into it.
Yeah, I've tried, and I'm not gonna air anyone's names right now, but like I
Yep.
have a list. Like I know people that want to and have been told that it
Really?
doesn't sell. Publishers won't pick it up. Publishers right now will take genre stuff and they'll take middle grade. So there's a lot of and again, there are so many amazing works being made in those spaces, and I don't mean to be derogatory at all. But I think it's really tough if you want to make a slice of life comic for adult women. Like I have a friend who has this amazing plan for one that's with a little bit of magic sprinkled in, but she's tried to sell it and been told that it won't sell, so they won't buy it. So then she has to figure out how to make it herself. And there are a lot of
Yeah.
people in that boat right now. And I mean, it's not impossible, but it's a lot of work to be doing it without a promise of payment, right? So
Yeah.
we're in a place right now where publishers aren't necessarily interested in acquiring that kind of storytelling. And even when they do publish like great manga, like Even Though We're Adults or anything by Akiko Higashimura, I think that they're not seeing the sales that like Chainsaw Man is. And I love Chainsaw Man, so that's fine. Like Look Back by Fujimoto was absolutely incredible. I loved it. I bought it. A great like slice of life comic.
No.
But that it sold so well because people know Chainsaw Man.
Yeah.
So I think that it's kind of it's a tough place right now, and so you can do it, but you've got to find a way to do it yourself, and that's a really tough prospect for a lot of people
Yeah.
because it's a lot of work. And so I really understand why people. I don't think it's the fault of creators that we're not seeing it. I think it's solely at the feet of publishers who don't know how to market it and don't know how to like get it into people's hands.
Uh, I
Yeah.
agree, and I'll say it straight. Because I publishers need to figure out how to comic publishers, the comic industry really could really nicely figure out how to market to women. That'd be great. Women above 18, probably 15, even better. Because then
Yeah.
we would get those slice of life stuff, and I love that stuff. Um,
Yeah. And it's
yeah,
a great there are lots of women above that age that like love all the stuff that's coming out. And again, I don't mean to say that anybody shouldn't like what they love, but
yeah,
yeah, I agree. Like I think I'd like to see stories about women over 25, in
yes, please.
comics. It's so hard to find that. Again, like you can, but you got to go like your Drawn and Quarterlies, your Fantagraphics, like those kinds of
You're
spaces.
digging.
But I think there's a happy medium where it doesn't like we can have stuff that's like fun and maybe fantastical if that's what people want, but that like deals with issues of women that are a little bit older.
Yeah.
Is how I feel about it, but we'll see what happens. That's what I want to read though.
Agreed. I honestly, I'm in. Same thing. Like on my end of it, I would love to see a slice of life about just being a guy and just
Hmm.
working a job and figuring out relationships.
Yep.
But I feel like we could talk about this for a long time, and we have gone over time.
Absolutely.
Um, so you know what? Maybe we will catch up another time.
Please.
At a con or something or at a bar or whatever. Um, So my last question for tonight, it's very simple, very easy, I hope, is who do you think I should interview next?
Have you talked to Ricky Lima yet?
He's on my list.
Yeah.
I haven't. I really want to. He did Undergrowth, right?
He did, and he's done a whole bunch of like his Millennium Bomb book, and he's done some games and stuff. If you want to talk more about the ways that we wish the comic industry would change, and but ways that we're trying to make a change in the indie comic spaces, I think Ricky's a great person to chat to. He's really fun, and he's really thoughtful, and he's really passionate about comics, especially again like in an independent space, experimental space. And he's very encouraging, I think, for anybody who wants to make comics and is trying to figure out what to do next. I think he's a really good example of someone that's been like really going it on his own, and just making the stuff he wants to make and finding a way to make it happen. So I hope you can talk to him soon.
I will reach out. I love it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And again, Allison, absolutely. Thank you for taking the time tonight to come on the show, chat comics with me, and let me know what it is that editors do. It was great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Conrad. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. And for the folks out there in YouTube land, one, Shades of Fear. Go to AllisonO'Toole.com. You can find links through the site to get this book, either digital, or if you're in Toronto, you can go to Silver Snail and Sidekick, which are both great comic shops. That would be my recommendation because I like, physical copies. And yeah, go get Allison's book because it's great. And of course, comment down below what you thought of Allison, what you think of Shades of Fear if you've read it, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Nah. Collector problems, cliffhangers, mysteries. You need answers. When did Batman become Green Lantern?